right. Thank you guys so much for being here. Good evening. Welcome to my lecture recital. I'm very excited to be presenting this lecture and performance on the DreamNet by Warren Benson. See if we can get everything to work tonight. It seems like everything's just been a little off. The DreamNet was composed in 1975 for American saxophonist Frederick Kemke, who had requested a new work for saxophone. Benson dedicated the work to fellow composer and friend Alec Wilder after being inspired by a book that was gifted from Wilder to Benson. The title of the work refers to a webbed device that North American Indians would hang from the trees over the heads of their children while they were gathering wild rice on Lake Superior. Benson took Wilder's early octets for winds and rhythm, and Hemke's proximity to Lake Superior as his initial inspiration for the work. The intent of the composer is to blend the differing timbres of saxophone with a string quartet through the use of extended techniques and non-standard notation in the parts of all ensemble members. A multitude of timbral possibilities is masterfully displayed throughout every voice of the ensemble. The composition features an array of multiphonics and microtones. Benson also weaves rudimentary jazz elements throughout the work that are constantly interrupted by other elements of the composition. This was a nod to the works that Wilder wrote. That was a signature of his pieces. They never felt really comfortable. Visually, the score and individual parts can be quite difficult to read and interpret despite the inclusion of a key for symbols used. Through extensive searches, I've only found 2 commercially available recordings of this work. The DreamNet can be heard on the 1981 recording, Music of Warren Benson by Frederick Kemke and the Kronos Quartet. It's also found on a 2021 recording titled Saxophone Recital Kumai Masato, available through the Naxos Music Library. While other recordings that may exist of recitals at major universities, in many cases they would require credentials to access. One example is actually Dr. Nessler's performance at the University of North Texas in the late 1990s. And as an example on that, even having credential for our UNT recording archive, I could not find it and had to ask Dr. Nessler for the recording. There was no record of it anywhere. Chapter 2 is about Warren Benson and the saxophone. Warren Benson is well known for his contributions to the field of wind band and percussion. His total compositions exceed 150 works in varied styles and instrumentation, including works for wind band, choir, concertos, chamber ensembles, and song cycles. His love of poetry and literature served as the inspiration for many of his works. He's perhaps best known for his expressive writing style and contributions to the genres of song cycles and wind and percussion music. He was born on January 26, 1924 in Detroit, Michigan. His formal music training started in grade school. It was really rudimentary lessons, playing with shoes on the gym floor because they couldn't afford music equipment and books during the Depression era at that time. In high school, Benson was given the opportunity to learn multiple instruments, including horn, trombone, cornet, bass, and piano. And he was lucky enough to study with members of the Detroit Symphony Orchestra. He took classes in orchestration and wrote his first arrangements as a member of the jazz ensemble. He credited this experience as sparking his interest in composing, and Benson would continue writing jazz arrangements during his studies at the University of Michigan, where he received a bachelor's and master's degree in music theory. And despite receiving 2 degrees at the University of Michigan, he's primarily self-taught in composition. That was not any of his studies. From 1953 to 1967, Benson served as professor of music and composition in residence at Ithaca College. I have to say, go Bombers. We have some Ithaca College grads in the audience. He taught percussion and composition there. His teaching method combined disciplines in order to create a cohesive approach to art. Lessons would introduce students to a variety of artistic disciplines, including various styles of music, dance, poetry, and art. While at Ithaca, Benson would have the opportunity to work alongside fellow professors Karel Husa and Donald Senta. Czech composer Karel Husa joined the faculty of the neighboring Cornell University in Ithaca, New York in 1954, and virtuoso saxophonist Donald Senta would later join the faculty at Ithaca College in 1965. Benson joined the faculty at the Eastman School of Music in 1967, where he would teach composition until his retirement in 1993. He also served as distinguished visiting professor at Southern Methodist University from 1986 to 1988. He was a founding member of the Progressive Arts Society and the World Association for Symphonic Bands and Ensembles, and in 2003, Benson was elected to the Progressive Arts Society Hall of Fame. He has quite a few contributions to the saxophone repertoire. His compositions include 3 solos for alto saxophone, a saxophone quartet, and 6 chamber works that utilize 1 or more saxophones. A number of these compositions are dedicated to or inspired by famed saxophonist Sigurd Roscher, Donald Senta, and Frederick Kemke. He also credits saxophonist Jean-Marie Londex, Larry Teal, and Cecil Leeson along with composer Karel Husa, as influences on his writing for the instrument. That's a pretty strong list of influences if you're a saxophonist. Though his first writing was for jazz ensembles, Benson credits Sigurd Roscher as the reason he decided to compose for the saxophone. Sigurd Roscher and Warren Benson first met in the summer of 1953 at the Brevard Music Center in North Carolina. Roscher was a German saxophonist who moved to the United States in 1939. As one of the saxophonist's earliest proponents, he was a champion of extending the range of the saxophone through the use of harmonics. Roscher would regularly demonstrate this extended register, or altissimo, to composers in order to persuade them to compose new concerti for the instrument. By the time Roscher and Benson met in 1953, Roscher had already premiered works dedicated to him by world-class composers such as Jockey Bear, Paul Hindemith, Alexander Glaznov, and Ingolf Dahl. The picture on the screen is actually them working together in 1953 at the Brevard Music Center, and I think it's an interesting angle because when I first saw it, I literally thought Sigurd Roscher was a child. He looks really young, but he's 46 at the time, so I thought that was kind of curious. During their time together at Brevard, Roscher performed Ingolf Dahl's concerto with the Transylvania Music Camp Band and Lars Erik Larsson's concerto with the strings. Benson played timpani with the student ensemble for those concerts, and they performed a few of Benson's works as well. Roscher was immediately impressed upon hearing his music for the first time and immediately demonstrated the abilities of the saxophone for Benson, asking him to write a piece for us. Concertino for alto saxophone and wind ensemble was completed in 1954 and premiered in 1955. The second movement of the work is quite recognizable to many people. It's Aeolian Song. It was previously written as its own work, and then the outer movements were added to create the entire concertino. Roscher and Benson maintained a relationship over the next few years that would result in Benson writing several more works for Roscher. While at Ithaca College, Benson had the opportunity to work alongside famed American saxophonist Donald Senta. Senta served as the first professor of saxophone at Ithaca College before he taught at Hart School of Music and then later having a legendary career at the University of Michigan. Senta was highly regarded for his technical abilities and has premiered more than 40 works by American composers. Benson's composition Star Edge for alto saxophone and wind ensemble was completed in 1965 and premiered by Donald Senta and the Ithaca High School Band under the baton of Frank Battisti. Curiously, they did another performance later at Cass Technical High School with Warren Benson conducting. They are both alumni of Cass Technical High School in Detroit, but were not there at the same time. So this is them before that performance going over the score together. I thought that was kind of cool. In addition to Benson's own contributions to the saxophone repertoire, it seems that partial credit is due to him for Karel Husa's Elegy at Rondo. Benson recounts in an interview that having introduced Sigurd Roscher to Karel Husa over dinner at his house in Ithaca, New York, and then the next day he loaned them the keys to his studio, and Roscher spent the entire day demonstrating to Husa what the saxophone could do, and it resulted in Husa writing Elegy at Rondo, which is like one of the landmark works in our repertoire. He had a lot of connections to saxophone. He also served as the guest speaker at the first ever World Saxophone Congress in Chicago in 1969. This is one of my favorite pictures ever. I've seen it titled Who's Who in Saxophone. We have Frederick Fennell, Fred Hemke, Cecil Leeson, Donald Senta, Eugene Rousseau, Warren Benson, and Sigurd Roscher. That's a pretty cool picture. And by some accounts, he was very instrumental in making that happen as well. Warren Benson's primary inspiration for the Dreamnet came from a book that was gifted to him by fellow composer and friend Alec Wilder about canoeing the white water of Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, and Canada. Wilder greatly enjoyed spending his creative time around Benson towards the end of his career, finding him to be honest and never quite pushy in his musical views. Benson's works tended to be much more dissonant than those of Wilder's, and Wilder would often question him on this. But if Benson could play on the piano the bass line and sing over top the dissonance that he was hearing, it was enough to prove to Alec Wilder that that music was okay, and he wouldn't question him on it anymore. With its wide use of dissonance and inspiration by Wilder's octets, it's only fitting that Benson dedicated the Dreamnet to Alec Wilder. Sigurd Olson, the author of the book that was gifted to him, was an American author and conservationist who grew up in northern Wisconsin, where he developed a lifelong attachment to the outdoors. As a conservationist, he played a key role in drafting the Wilderness Act and establishing the Wilderness Preservation System. He also assisted in the establishment of Alaska's Arctic Wildlife Refuge, Many of Olson's writings are collections of reflective essays on his experiences in the wilderness and aim to connect the audience with the natural world. Vincent actually never said what the book was. It's pretty obvious that it's Runes of the North. The first chapter is literally the Dream Net. In the book, Olson describes a part of one of the major rivers that empties into Lake Superior, and he discusses how Chippewa Indians used to leave their children under the dream nets while they went and worked, and they believed that they would keep them safe and ward off the evil spirits while they were away. American saxophonist Fred Hemke was finishing his doctorate in Wisconsin and previously requested a new work for saxophone from Benson. Hemke was a virtuoso saxophonist and the first American to be awarded the Premier Prix diploma from the Paris Conservatory. Benson took Hemke's proximity to Lake Superior and his own intrigue in the way that dream catchers were used as the inspiration for the dream net. Kind of a perfect marriage of where the location was for both of those things. The composition masterfully merges the use of multiphonics, quarter tones, key clicks, pitch bends, flutter tonguing, varying vibrato speeds, and air sounds to create a wide variety of tonal effects, representing the story of these dream catchers. Benson states that he found the belief that the dream catchers would ward off evil spirits, as well as the various light patterns that would reflect through them as they shifted in the wind, to be fascinating. DreamNet was premiered on May 23rd, 1975 on the campus of Northwestern University with saxophonist Fred Hemke and the Eckstein Quartet. It was later recorded in 1978, again with Fred Hemke, but this time with the Kronos Quartet. There's no explanation for the change there. That's just how they did it. This picture is actually Fred Hemke and the Kronos Quartet recording in the studio in 1978. So there's quite a few examples of non-standard techniques in saxophone literature and notation. Non-standard techniques, sometimes also referred to as extended techniques, have become more and more present as the repertoire for saxophone has evolved. This term is used to describe any tones, effects, or performance requirements that seek to change the standard response of the instrument. In the Dream Net, these techniques include air sounds, multiphonics, altissimo, microtones, timbre shifts, and varying lip and mouthpiece pressure for the saxophonist. As composers have sought to include these techniques, they have found the need to invent notation markings for their performer to interpret as a means of achieving the desired effect. Since each composer uses slightly different methods to indicate these techniques, it's not uncommon for a key to be included for the symbols in the score. Benson's The Dream Net includes a key in the score that includes non-standard notation used for the ensemble as a whole, the saxophonist, and the string quartet. 3 separate things there. These symbols are used to indicate changing embouchure pressure, amount of mouthpiece in the mouth, speed of repeated figures, bow pressure, glissandi, and more. He also uses spatial notation at times throughout in the use of boxed cells that we'll look at a little bit later that indicate the amount of time a certain melodic idea or technique should take. The ensemble must carefully communicate during these passages of brief improvisation in order to stay together. The saxophonist is tasked with having full control of extended techniques on the instrument to display a variety of timbral possibilities used. Edison Denisov's sonata for alto saxophone and piano is regarded as the first composition of major importance to utilize multiphonics, the first saxophone piece of major importance. This is the sounding of multiple pitches at the same time through the manipulation of fingerings and sometimes a change in embouchure and airstream. This is scored through showing the multiple pitches that should sound, and in most instances, the composer will include a fingering that should achieve that effect as well. Often the saxophonist must adjust the airstream and or lip pressure on the reed to achieve the desired result. In some cases, the model of saxophone or mouthpiece can present the need to reconsider the provided fingering, while keeping the composer's desired effect in mind. Saxophonist and composer Ryo Noda is well known for his unaccompanied saxophone solos that utilize extended techniques when performing the saxophone in a way of imitating the Japanese shakuhachi flute. His compositions are some of the first to require a key to interpret the notation used. The use of spatial notations through box cells and more in Benson's Dream Net is quite similar to the system that Noda used. You can see here that Noda uses triangles and squares and circles, and each of them are representing a different tempo. But in his music, he uses just individual notes. So like that idea will be at the presto speed, presto, moderato, as opposed to in Benson's, we'll see later, it's the same idea, but then it's repeated forever. So these take a little bit more interpretation from the performer as you go through. The use of these rhythmic cells combines the function of staff notation and graphic notation so that the composer may fully convey the desired effect. There's another form of indeterminacy, a compositional tool pioneered by American composer John Cage in the 1950s. This technique, they've left certain aspects of up to the performer to interpret themselves. Some other composers for saxophone music to incorporate this would be M. William Carlins, Warren Benson, and Rio Noda. Other works for the saxophone that make use of a key signature, or not a key signature, I'm sorry, a key for symbols used, would be Frederick Fox's Here Again in Memory and Ronald Caravan's Improvisation Romani. In the liner notes from the first published recording with Frederick Kemke and the Kronos Quartet, Benson stated that the primary challenge in this composition was balancing the timbral distortion and tuning of the saxophone multiphonic sonorities with the normal sounds of a string quartet. Much of the music features the string quartet playing extended glissandi or repeated unmetered rhythmic figures, with the saxophonist using a wide range of extended techniques to build and release musical tension. The result in many instances is sustained cluster chords. For this reason, the analysis in my paper focused primarily on how the extended techniques and timbres create sudden changes in the intensity and mood throughout the work. All three movements are through composed, and none of the melodic material returns at any point. I don't want to go through the entire analysis on all of it, but I do want to look at how he notated these to make it work. So we talked about the box cells. These are these squares right here. And in each of them, he'll have a series of notes in there. And if it's just the box, you're supposed to repeat it until the squiggly line ends. And that can go forever, like long times in there. If he's put a diagonal slash through the left top of the box, then it's the same thing, but as fast as possible until that ends. And likewise, on other sustained notes, he just beams them forever. And the note head will just be in that first measure, and you have to carefully watch for where it ends later. It can be really easy to miss sometimes. He also asks for us to play as high as possible sometimes on the strings, attaching the piece of rough watercolor paper, we'll talk about that a little bit later, on the sleeve or pant leg to create a different sound. Quarter tones. This is continued from the cymbals. This is still for the strings. And then for the saxophone, air sounds, we'll talk about how to achieve those. And then the amount of lip or mouthpiece pressure. So lip pressure based on how much pressure you have with your lip or jaw on the bottom of the reed. And mouthpiece pressure, how firmly the mouthpiece is then pushing into your top teeth or pushing into your embouchure. It can be quite confusing. It took a little while to go through and just mark each of those in. So it's pretty involved. So on initial preparation, upon first glance at the score, the dream net can look quite intimidating to the performer. The use of small print combined with scoring of extended techniques and spatial notation can be daunting to discern. Ostinati with seemingly ambiguous rhythms are weaved throughout and make ensemble communication the utmost importance. It's critical that each performer knows their part, how their part interacts, and the overall structure of each phrase. Saxophonists should be careful not to overshadow the string quartet, which is quite easy to do as a saxophonist. Throughout the composition, the voice of the string quartet and timbre of the saxophone are meant to merge, creating one homogeneous sound. Each musician will need to spend time analyzing notation symbols used by Benson and mark clearly in their part how they affect the ensemble's performance. Given that the key for symbols is only provided in the score and not the individual parts, for ease of reading and learning, it is strongly recommended that each musician make a separate copy of the key to use as a reference when practicing. That way you're not having to flip all the way back to the beginning and all the way back. It just makes your life a lot easier. String players will need to practice percussive rhythms on watercolor paper, as notated, as well as glissandi and quarter tones. The saxophonist will need to practice pitch bends, air sounds, multiphonics, and vocal sounds. Daily overtone exercises will help with the response of high tones and multiphonics. In the case of some multiphonics written, Benson has indicated which notes should be most present through symbols indicating the lip tension and mouthpiece pressure. Determining which note should be most present in the multiphonic is paramount to consistent response. So there's quite a few technical challenges found in the saxophone part, the biggest of which is the multiphonics. They're everywhere, and they require all kinds of changes as they change throughout in terms of mouthpiece pressure and air direction, and some of them took a while to figure out just how to get it to respond. In many cases, the suggested fingerings provided in the saxophone part are too small to read as well. This is a little bit shown right here. These two fingerings, it might be hard to see from there, are actually exactly the same. This last finger in your right hand should be up, open, but it looks closed right there. But in the score, you can see that it's actually open. So it gets a little confusing that way. There's just one finger difference in that. So I tested the multiphonics in this piece on multiple models of saxophone and mouthpiece, as we discussed earlier. They can make a huge difference. The saxophones that I used were Selmer Supreme, Selmer Series 3, Selmer Mark 6, a Yamaha 62, and a Yamaha Custom EX. Mouthpiece selections were Selmer Concept, DeLongo Concept, S90-180, S90-190, and S80C Star, and a Van Doren AL3. I thought it was really curious as I was testing the multiphonics that the newest of the horns that I tried, the Selmer Supreme, I had the least success. And it could be due to the tone holes being moved around to improve the tuning on the instrument. It's like a model within the last 5 years. And the one that I had the absolute most success on was my Mark 6, which would have been still popular around the time that that came out. I have not elected to use my Mark 6 tonight just because I need some pads replaced. So it's not in the best shape. I'm actually going to play it on my Series 3, but I found that the mouthpiece didn't make nearly as much of a difference after that. The Supreme was really the only place that I had trouble in getting those to respond. But I thought that was kind of curious. Stephen Mock's Saxophone Warm-Ups provides an excellent pedagogical exercise for saxophonists that are learning to successfully produce multiphonics. While it's not a comprehensive guide to every multiphonic possible to produce on the saxophone, common multiphonics are presented in a logical method and step-by-step approach to achieve successful response. The saxophonist learning to produce multiphonics is provided with a series of passages that gets progressively more difficult. It starts with an individual multiphonic approach by a single tone, and by the end you're going between different multiphonics back and forth. We also have pitch bends located quite a bit throughout the piece. Sometimes they're labeled smear, as we can see right here. These are intended to mimic the glissandi found within the string part and can be accomplished through a mixture of embouchure changes and slowly adding or removing keys. The markings shown on the slide for measure 29, 30, and 32, right here, here, and here, should be interpreted as descending pitch bends and should be accomplished by loosening the embouchure pressure around the mouthpiece, thereby lowering the pitch. In some cases, like in measure 32, the right hand keys can be added halfway to help facilitate this, but a direct change in pitch should not be heard. Instead, just a bend and then the note ends. So like right here, you could add the right hand just a little bit down. Likewise, on some of the palm keys, you could let go of them just a little bit right here, but you want to be very careful that you don't physically change notes. The smear technique can easily be accomplished through slight movements of the lower jaw and manipulation of muscles in the tongue. This can be practiced through mouthpiece exercises or pitch bends, or through practice of the pedagogical device referred to as the front F trick. This is described in Donald Sensa's book, Voicing an Approach to the Saxophone's Third Register. In this exercise, you play front F on the saxophone, and you use the oral cavity muscles, your tongue, and your throat to bend the pitch down as far as you can. Done successfully, you can pull it down a full octave. And I've found that to be one of the most beneficial exercises for overall response on multiphonics and altissimo as well. Binz's background as a percussionist is on full display in this piece, and especially in the second movement. Throughout these passages, the strings are instructed to bow on watercolor paper, while the saxophonist makes short, accented air sounds. His instructions state to blow air at the mouthpiece with the syllables T2. This sound is best made audible by placing the mouthpiece right at the edge of the performer's lips, using short, tongue-stopped bursts of air. When the 16th note, so those would sound like this, would be just right at the tip of the mouthpiece, without it in your mouth. You have to be very careful not to make the reed vibrate when you do that, so it's got to be a little farther away. When the 16th note passages are added later, the saxophonist can use a double tonguing technique on the 16th notes in order to accomplish a precise articulation. This is done by first tonguing with the tip of the tongue behind the teeth with a T syllable, followed by the back of the tongue articulating at the top of the mouth with a Ku syllable, so T, Ku. Same thing with the air, short bursts of air, but you're articulating in a different place for the second one. Additional technical challenges. The music in movement 2 utilizes the addition of key clicks and voice noise. The saxophonist should experiment with finding the best timbre and most audible key clicks on their particular instrument. Key click should be coordinated with a continuation of improvised air sounds. A particularly resonant option when executing key click techniques is to finger low D and firmly press the low C lever to create a percussive sound on the instrument. Alternatively, you could also add low B flat, the low pinky keys. They tend to get a big boom out of the saxophone that works quite well. Benson provides no guidelines for the production of the vocal sounds on the score parts, though they should blend with the ensemble and not overpower the rest of the music. Saxophone can go from the silent T that they were doing for the air sounds to audibly saying it as they play too. So instead of and so you get them coming through as they go, and they'll resonate through the instrument a little bit. A few ensemble considerations. Benson includes a few examples of indeterminacy within the DreamNet. The most prominent example of this compositional technique is the use of box cells to indicate repeated figures as shown on the slide. So we can see them employed here. These are the ones that are as fast as possible, and you can see it's not always an even or clean set of notes. It doesn't fill the whole measure. It can just be a few notes, and then you're going to play them as fast as possible until you get to the arrival point where you're playing in time. And he weaves that in with other figures that are also out of time as fast as possible. These are things that are in time, and then things that are glissandoing between other things. So it's all kinds of ambiguity going on if you're not careful. He includes two different variations in this notation. This one is the fast one, and then without the slash, it's just in time. So if he were to leave that line off, then these would just be eighth notes until that's over. Though these figures are ultimately played at a time, it's important that the musicians continue to count and stay with the ensemble so we get clean transitions between ideas and figures. When instructed to play as high as possible, the saxophonist should elect to play the highest note that they are able to achieve consistently. It would be really easy to put a lot of pressure on the mouthpiece and the reed and just get a big squeak, but it won't blend with the carefully placed timbres of the quartet, so we want to make sure that they fit appropriately. In preparation for rehearsals and ultimately the performance of this work, the ensemble should mark cues clearly through their individual parts. Additionally, in sections of music that utilize a gradual tempo change through repeated sections, the ensemble should decide who will cue the music occurring at the metric change, just like in any other ensemble setting. We actually found as a group, I showed up to the first rehearsal playing off of the saxophone part, thinking that that would be normal, and everyone else had the score. I didn't even think to use the score, and the score was way easier to read from. But it would not have been possible in 1975 when this was released to do that because there's so many page turns. So I think the technology we have today in iPads makes that approach so much easier. It makes seeing the ideas, how they transition between players, simpler. It's less that you have to write in your music, and it gives you more confidence as you come in. On that note, movement 2 briefly features some mixed meter within the ensemble. This on the slide right here, starting at 180. It actually starts a couple measures before this. But in this section, everyone is alternating in some way between 12/8 and 4/4. And when we've had that previously in the piece, the eighth note stays the same all the way through. The eighth note pulse will reign supreme in those. In this section, the big pulse stays the same. So you're going to have multiple members in 4/4 and multiple in 12/8, but the big pulse of the beat 1, 2, 3, 4 is still continuous. And then it will change. And it's not consistently the same people in the same time signatures. So essentially what you get is a different way of writing him, having him write duple and triple figures by changing the time signature. But it makes it more confusing, I think. It does. So through his contributions to the repertoire and wide influence on saxophonists and fellow composers, Warren Benson has had a measurable impact within the saxophone world. His friendship with saxophonists Donald Senta, Frederick Kemke, Sigurd Roscher, and Jean-Marie Lundex proved crucial in development of the saxophone repertoire. Benson was always willing to introduce them to other composers and constantly pushed them to pursue new works for the saxophone. Likewise, his friendship with Karel Husa provided the spark for multiple works that are now considered to be standards in the saxophone repertoire. As a result, his contributions to the saxophone repertoire go far beyond his own writings. The DreamNet is a shining example of his colorful writing style and constant pursuit of finding new timbres and sonorities to include in his writings. The inclusion of non-standard techniques such as multiphonics, pitch bends, ear sounds, key clicks, and voice noises in the saxophone part require the performer to be in complete command of their instrument. The extended sections that feature no standard sounds produced throughout the ensemble in Movement 2 perfectly showcase Benson's background as a percussionist. When performed correctly, this movement essentially transforms the saxophone string quartet briefly into a percussion ensemble, completely mimicking the sounds that they would make. The saxophonist should incorporate daily exercises of multiphonics, overtones, and pitch bends when preparing this work. A basic understanding of double tonguing and tongue stop articulations will also be necessary to properly execute the ear sounds. The inclusion of these techniques in daily practice will be paramount in successfully performing this piece. Though this work can seem quite daunting to prepare, and it definitely can feel quite daunting to put together as well, this guide serves to make that process much simpler. This often overlooked work deserves to be performed with more frequency. It is my hope that this guide will encourage saxophonists to approach it more often and it will not be overlooked So that concludes the lecture portion of tonight's recital. I do want to thank really quickly Dr. Nessler for all of his help throughout all of this process. And my colleagues that are joining me on stage, Kate, Natalie, Becky, Atticus, this would absolutely not be possible without their help as well. So if you'll give us just a couple minutes to get our instruments in tune, we'll have a complete performance of the Dreamnet. And I wanted to leave this picture of the Dreamnet on the TV while I played, and then I realized it's on my iPad that I also need to perform. So I'm very excited. I wanted to have a visual. This is The Dreamnet by Warren Benson.